Hey there, I'm glad you're here. Tonight, we're sliding into a time when cars weren't just machines, they were memories on wheels. Long before backup cameras and Bluetooth, the features inside a 1960s car could feel like tiny miracles. A chrome push-button radio, a flick of the wing window, the hush of a ride on new white walls. It wasn't luxury. Exactly. It was something quieter, more personal. But don't let the shine fool you. Cars back then got hot. They broke down. And if you were a woman, a kid, or just poor, the road didn't always feel so free. Still, for many of us, those rides held some of life's most ordinary magic. Family trips, Sunday drives, and the sweet thrill of a bench seat close to someone you liked. If these slow, memory-soaked evenings speak to you, I'd be glad if you liked or subscribed. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now ease back, maybe put on a soft fan in the background, and let's go for a little ride. There was something almost ceremonial about slipping the key into the ignition of a 1960s car. It wasn't just a motion, it was a moment. The key itself was solid, often a single-cut piece of metal without the plastic grips we're used to today. No fob, no button, no transponder chip, just metal meeting metal. You'd sit down on the broad bench seat, the vinyl crackling slightly under your weight, and reach for the ignition to the right of the steering column. With one firm turn, the engine would roar to life. It was a sound you felt through your ribs, a deep, rumbling confirmation that the machine had surrendered to you. In the 1960s, most cars were carbureted, which meant the first few seconds after ignition were a dance between the throttle and the choke, especially on cold mornings. Sometimes you'd have to pump the gas once or twice before turning the key, and sometimes the engine would stall just after catching. But once it settled into its rhythm, it was like lighting a candle in the darkness, quiet assurance that your journey could begin. It felt like magic because in that moment, you weren't just starting a car. You were starting freedom. Kids sat wide-eyed in the back seat, watching their world begin to blur as the scenery passed by. Parents whispered or argued softly in the front seat. Radios crackled to life. And for a generation raised on walking, biking, or riding the bus, there was no sound quite like that first crank and cough of a V8 waking up. It was power, it was presence, and it belonged to you. Before air conditioning became common, the wing window was a little triangle of salvation. If you grew up in the 1960s, you probably remember reaching for that tiny chrome latch, flipping it open, and feeling the sudden blast of wind funnel into the car. Positioned at the front corner of each front door window, these pivoting vents were more than just clever design. They were essential. Wing windows, sometimes called vent windows, angled the breeze just right, cooling your face without blasting your whole head. On summer drives, especially before the sun went down, you could angle both vents open and feel like the whole front seat turned into a wind tunnel. It wasn't just air, it was relief. Some cars had rear versions too, especially station wagons. But the front vents were the real stars. They kept your sweaty thighs from sticking to the vinyl seats and gave your left arm a break when it was too hot to rest on the door. And since most folks smoked back then, the vent window became a natural place to flick ashes or clear out a fog of cigarette smoke. Even non-smokers appreciated the ventilation. Unlike today's sealed-tight cars with computer-controlled airflow, there was something very manual and strangely satisfying about that little glass wedge. You could hear the wind change pitch as you adjusted it just so, and when you closed it, it clicked shut with finality. A simple mechanism, perfectly tuned to a simpler time. When you see one today, maybe on a restored Impala or an old pickup still kicking around a farm, it's hard not to feel a small tug at your chest, like seeing an old friend, forgotten by most, but unforgettable to those who remember. One of the most thrilling sounds of the 1960s was the deep, satisfying clunk of a power window lowering into the door. For those lucky enough to ride in a car that had them, power windows felt like something out of the Jetsons. You have to remember, this was an age when rolling down a window meant exactly that you rolled it, using a crank handle that stuck out from the door panel. It took a little arm strength, especially for backseat passengers or kids with short arms. So, when you pressed a button and the glass moved by itself, that felt downright futuristic. Power windows first showed up in luxury cars like Cadillacs and Lincolns, but by the mid-60s, they were making their way into more affordable models too, especially as optional upgrades. It was the kind of thing that made your neighbor's car feel just a little fancier than yours. The controls were often sleek little chrome switches, sometimes mounted on the door panel, other times in the center console. And there was something oddly luxurious about the way the glass moved, not too fast, not too slow, just a smooth glide down into the door frame. You could sit back, press the button with one finger, and let the breeze roll in like you were a movie star. In winter, the power window was even more appreciated, no more stiff cranking with gloves on. Of course, if the motor broke, that window stayed put until a mechanic fixed it, but that didn't matter. In those moments when it worked, it was magic, a small electric marvel that made even a dusty station wagon feel like something special. Few things captured a child's imagination in the 1960s, like the sound of an automatic radio antenna rising into the air. If your family had a car with one of those, chances are you remember how it made you pause. The moment the key turned and the radio came alive, that slim silver rod would begin its slow, whispery ascent from the front fender. It made a faint buzzing sound, not loud, but distinct, and you always knew something cool was about to follow. Most car antennas were fixed back then, just metal rods you pulled up by hand or left extended all the time. They got bent, stolen, or snapped off in car washes. But the automatic ones? They were elegant, hidden until needed, designed to vanish when the radio was turned off, slipping smoothly back into the body of the car like a magician's wand. They weren't common. Usually found on pricier models, Buicks, Oldsmobiles, even some higher-end Fords, the automatic antenna became a quiet symbol of status. It didn't improve the radio signal much. It wasn't essential. But it was beautiful. A tiny mechanical flourish that said, "This car is a little bit different." And if you were a kid standing near the passenger side fender when it started to rise, you might have stared like it was alive. You might have even tried to grab it, though your dad would bark, "Leave it alone, you'll break it." It was one of those features that didn't need to exist, but made the car feel more alive, more personal. And once you had one, you missed it in every car that didn't. Back in the 1960s, before GPS and digital displays, the dashboard clock was a quiet little marvel. Not every car had one, and when it did, you noticed. Set into the dashboard, often framed in chrome, it wasn't just there to tell time, it gave the whole interior a touch of class. Most of them were analog, with tiny moving hands ticking steadily across a numbered face. Some lit up in soft green or orange when the headlights were on, giving off a warm, gentle glow during nighttime drives. If your parents were anything like mine, they didn't always keep the clock set right. Maybe it was 5 minutes fast just to be safe. Or maybe it had stopped ticking altogether, frozen at some odd hour like a memory trapped in glass. Still, you looked at it. Kids in the back seat watched it crawl toward lunchtime on long road trips. Couples checked it before curfews. And on foggy mornings, the glow of that little clock somehow made the car feel safe, like the inside of a snow globe. They weren't always reliable. Some ran on mechanical movements that had to be wound or adjusted regularly. Later ones used tiny electric motors, which could short out or fail entirely. But when they worked, they gave a sense of presence, the kind you don't get from a blinking set of numbers on a touchscreen. They reminded you that time was passing not in beeps or vibrations, but in slow, measured motion. There was a rhythm to it. One tick for every mile, every story, every quiet thought between towns. And when you look back, sometimes that ticking is the sound that lingers. In the 1960s, few car features made people pause and smile quite like the cigarette lighter. It was such a small thing, but it felt futuristic, even a little bit dangerous. You'd push in that round metal button just about the size of a silver dollar, and wait. A few seconds later, it would pop back out with a soft click, the coiled wire inside glowing orange like the eye of a tiny stove. Most cars came with one by default, even if you didn't smoke. Some had extras in the back seat, especially in upscale sedans or wagons, complete with ashtrays built into the doors or seat backs. Kids were usually warned not to touch them, but curiosity often won. At least once, every child in a 60s car tried pushing it in just to see what would happen, and many of us remember someone learning the hard way not to test that heat. But to the adults, especially the men, it felt like convenience at their fingertips. No need for matches, just power from the car itself. My dad used it every time we started a long drive. Roll the window down a few inches with the crank, tap the ash outside, flick it into the metal tray with practiced ease. Today, those built-in lighters are mostly gone, replaced by USB ports and plastic caps labeled 12V. The ashtrays too erased from newer models, as if we've forgotten they were ever normal. But for those who remember, the cigarette lighter wasn't just about smoking. It was warmth, motion, a ritual of adulthood, a moment of stillness before the road stretched on. There was a kind of magic in the way headlights used to respond to a twist of the hand. Before automatic lights, before sensor-activated beams or touchscreens, you reached for a little knob near the steering column and gave it a turn. With that small motion, the front of the car came alive. Twin beams lit up the road like eyes in the dark. But even more magical were the hidden headlights. Some cars in the 60s, mostly sportier or higher-end models, like the Corvette, the Charger, or certain Pontiacs, had headlights that weren't visible until needed. They lived behind flip panels or in rotating housings, smooth and secret until summoned. When you turned the lights on, those panels would either slide, flip, or rotate open, revealing the round headlights tucked inside. It was like the car had a trick up its sleeve, and the noise it made, a faint mechanical whir or a soft click, added to the feeling that the machine had come alive just for you. As a kid, you'd beg to be the one to turn the knob, just to see those eyelids open. And if the mechanism got stuck, which it sometimes did in the cold, someone had to gently tap it loose. But when they worked, it was a small moment of theater every time the sun went down. Cars don't do that anymore. These days, everything's built for efficiency. No flourish, no surprise. But back then, those hidden headlights weren't just practical. They were personality. They gave the car a face. And to the folks lucky enough to drive one, it felt like riding around with a secret only you and the car knew. Nothing felt quite as inviting in a 1960s car as the bench seat. Unlike today's molded bucket seats, the front bench was one long, cushioned stretch from door to door. It didn't hug you or contour to your back, but it had its own kind of comfort, soft, springy, and roomy. Most were covered in vinyl that stuck to your thighs in summer and turned icy cold in winter, but nobody seemed to mind. If anything, the bench seat encouraged closeness. Couples could sit shoulder to shoulder, with the driver's arm stretched easily behind the passenger. Kids could pile in 3 wide without a seatbelt between them. It was perfect for sliding across, especially when your mom or grandma didn't want to open the passenger door and simply scooted over to the driver's side. And on a quiet night after a movie or church, that front seat became a place to sit and talk, hands folded, headlights dimmed, the radio murmuring in the background. The bench made driving feel social. Even the gear shift, often mounted on the steering column, was designed to keep the space between you open. No center console, No barriers, just a flat span of vinyl or cloth where anything could happen. In some towns, a boy's car was judged by whether his date could slide over and sit close beside him. And yes, more than a few backseat siblings jeered at the sight. But the truth is, the bench seat wasn't just a piece of furniture, it was an experience. A reminder of when cars were built more for people than for specs. When space meant togetherness, not division. Back in the 1960s, nothing made a kid's heart race quite like the sound of a car horn, especially if it came from a rim-blow steering wheel. Now, not every car had one, but those that did felt like they had a secret superpower. Instead of pushing a button in the center of the wheel, drivers could just squeeze the rubberized edge of the wheel itself. That pressure would complete the circuit and sound the horn. No fumbling, no reaching. Just a simple, clever design that made you feel in command. Chrysler introduced the rim blow feature around 1969 in models like the Charger, Dart, and even the Imperial. The idea was simple. Improve driver safety and ease by letting you keep your hands on the wheel while alerting others. And it worked when it worked. The technology wasn't perfect. Over time, the rubber could harden or warp, and sometimes the horn would stick or not respond at all. But in those first few years, it felt fresh, like something from the future. Kids in the back seat would ask, "Can I try it?" And parents would smile but say no. It was one of those grown-up features, small, subtle, but undeniably fun. And the wheel itself, often wrapped in padded vinyl or wood grain, felt like a piece of fine craftsmanship. It wasn't just a tool, it was a centerpiece. Today's cars might come with paddle shifters or heated grips, but none of it carries the quiet thrill of squeezing a steering wheel and hearing the car answer back with a bold, clean beep. It was control, it was design, and for a brief moment, it was magic. There was something quietly mesmerizing about the old vent windows, those tiny triangular panes set into the front doors, just ahead of the main window glass. You don't see them anymore, but in the 1960s, they were everywhere. Some folks called them wing windows or kick-out vents, and they weren't just decorative. They were functional in a way that modern cars have never quite recaptured. With a gentle push or twist of the chrome latch, the vent window would swing open on its hinge, catching the breeze and channeling fresh air right into your lap or face. No fan, no noise. Just the wind, natural and alive. On summer days, it meant cooler drives without cranking down the big window. On rainy afternoons, you could angle the vent just right to pull in the smell of wet pavement without letting a drop inside. There was a kind of skill to it, learning just how far to open it for the perfect draft. My dad used to say it cleared out the cigar smoke faster than anything else. For kids riding shotgun, it gave you something to fiddle with, and if you were lucky, maybe you were trusted to open it yourself. They weren't high-tech, and they certainly weren't flashy. But vent windows gave drivers a sense of control over their environment. A little window with a big job. Today's cars are sealed tight, climate-controlled and button-pressed. Efficient, sure, but sterile. Those old vents reminded us that sometimes the best comfort comes from nature itself, and that the road was meant to be felt, not just watched through glass. If there was one sound that summed up freedom in the 1960s, it might have been the soft click of a mechanical push-button radio. Every dashboard had one, a rectangular face with chunky knobs on either side and a row of preset buttons lined up along the bottom like little soldiers. You'd twist the left knob to turn it on and adjust the volume. The right knob handled tuning, rolling the red indicator needle slowly across the frequency numbers, like a needle searching for something alive in the static. But the real magic was in those buttons. Each one could be set to a favorite AM station. When you pressed it, the whole mechanism jumped, the dial snapped into place, and the audio cut cleanly to a familiar voice or song. It wasn't instant like today's digital radio, but it felt deliberate, and that mechanical click, it was satisfying. You could feel it through your fingertips and hear it over the engine hum. Sunday mornings meant news and hymns. Weekdays brought farm reports, ball game scores, and the local DJ announcing a sock hop at the high school. And if you were lucky enough to be driving when your favorite song came on, you'd leave that station on for miles. Kids in the back seat would argue over who got to push the buttons. Parents would groan when someone hit the wrong one and lost the signal. And in some families like mine, you didn't touch the radio without permission. But even listening was an experience. Crackly, imperfect, warm. The kind of sound that wrapped around you and became part of the journey. Back in the 1960s, the rearview mirror wasn't just for glancing behind you, it was the stage for one of the cleverest little inventions of the time, the day-night mirror. Most folks don't think twice about it now, but when it first appeared, it felt like a thoughtful bit of everyday magic. At night, headlights from cars behind could be blinding, especially on long drives down dark two-lane roads. The brightness would bounce straight into your eyes, making it hard to focus ahead. But with a quick flick of the little tab beneath the mirror, the reflection dimmed, just enough to cut the glare while still showing what was behind you. The secret wasn't electronics or filters. It was a simple trick of angles and tinted glass. The mirror tilted slightly, redirecting the harsh light and making night driving more comfortable. Once you got used to it, it became second nature. Reach up, flip the lever, and keep going. No fuss. My dad always made a point of adjusting it the moment dusk rolled in. He called it evening mode, and somehow, it made the whole car feel calmer. Today, most cars use auto-dimming mirrors with sensors, but they lack that tactile click and that quiet decision, that moment of saying, "It's nighttime now." For those of us who grew up with it, the manual day-night mirror was more than a safety feature. It was part of the rhythm of the road, a sign that the journey was continuing into the dark and that the car, in its own simple way, was looking out for you. There was something quietly reassuring about the way 1960s cars handled their speedometers. Before digital numbers or glowing dashboards, you had what looked like a rolling ruler stretched across the panel. In many American cars, especially those from Ford or Chrysler, the speed wasn't shown on a circular dial, but with a long horizontal bar. As the car picked up speed, the colored line behind the numbers would stretch farther to the right, like a thermometer climbing. At 10 miles per hour, it just peaked out. By 60, it was halfway across the dashboard. It wasn't high-tech, but it felt almost scientific, like watching velocity happen in real time. Some models even changed the color of the bar as speed increased from green to amber to red, a kind of silent warning not to push your luck. To a kid in the front seat, it was mesmerizing. I remember tracing it with my eyes, guessing the exact moment it would tick over to the next number. And if my dad caught me staring too long, he'd say, "Quit clocking the car, just enjoy the ride." And I would, because those speedometers weren't just about numbers. They told a story of motion. You didn't glance at them. You read them. They made you feel part of the machine. You learned to sense your speed not by digits, but by rhythm and feel. In a way, they made driving a little more human and maybe just a little less rushed. One feature that often gets forgotten but felt like something straight out of science fiction at the time was the foot-operated high-beam switch. Tucked down on the far left side of the driver's floorboard, this little metal button let you control your headlights with the tap of a toe. It was such a small thing, but back then, it was pure genius. You didn't have to take your hand off the wheel or fumble around in the dark for a lever. Just press down, click, and the high beams lit up the road ahead like daylight. Tap it again, click, and they dimmed so you wouldn't blind oncoming traffic. There was a rhythm to it, one foot on the gas, the other dancing between the clutch and that clever little switch. It became second nature to drivers of the era, part of the choreography of the road. My dad would barely glance down, just feel for the button with the side of his boot and adjust without missing a beat. In wet weather, Sometimes you'd hear it crunch a little with grit from your shoes, and you knew it was working. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't delicate, but it was smart, built for real-world use, for people wearing work boots or winter galoshes. Eventually, high-beam controls migrated up to the steering column, and today they're part of an automatic system most folks don't even think about. But I still remember that little button. It gave you control with your feet, added rhythm to your driving, and let the car respond with a satisfying click that echoed in the quiet night. If you ever rode in a station wagon in the 1960s, then you probably remember the magic of the power rear window. Not all cars had it. Of course, it was mostly the long wood-paneled wagons, the kind families took on summer road trips or used for grocery runs when the trunk wasn't quite big enough. But when you did come across one of those windows, it felt downright futuristic. With the twist of a key or push of a dashboard button, the glass would slowly slide down into the tailgate, completely vanishing from sight. No hinges, no flaps, just a clean drop. And suddenly, the whole back of the car felt open to the world. Kids in the rear-facing seat would cheer when it lowered. Dogs loved it too, noses out, ears flapping in the wind. You could pass snacks through it at a drive-in, or air out the back after someone spilled milk on the carpet. My mom used to say it was her favorite part of the wagon. It made the whole car feel breezier, especially on hot days when the air just sat still. And there was a trick to it: don't open it when it's raining, and always check that it's closed before you go through the car wash. Simple wisdom passed from driver to driver. Today, most rear windows are fixed in place, sealed tight. Practical, maybe, but a little less joyful. That old power window wasn't just about convenience. It was about connection to the road, to the air, to the sense that your car wasn't a capsule, but part of the journey itself. Take a breath. We've only scratched the surface. Subscribe to keep uncovering what's hidden. Before everything became electronic and slick, one of the true marvels of 1960s cars was the cigarette lighter. Now, I'm not saying it was good for your health. Mercy me, we all know better now, but back then, it felt like something from a spaceship. Push it in, wait a few seconds, and ding, it popped out with a glowing orange coil, ready to light up. It was built right into the dashboard, usually near the ashtray, surrounded by chrome or faux wood paneling. The mechanics of it were oddly satisfying. You could hear the tiny heating element hum as it charged up. That little orange spiral seemed to pulse with energy, like it was holding a secret. And it wasn't just for cigarettes. Folks used them to light paper fuses, burn off frayed threads, or even warm the tip of a pencil to soften the lead. Some of the handier types, my brother Charlie among them, figured out how to use it to seal plastic or melt tiny holes in things. It had 100 uses, depending on your imagination. And the best part? When you pulled it out and it clicked, it gave off a faint smell of metal and ozone like electricity itself. Later, it evolved into what we now call a 12-volt socket, a place to charge your phone or power a mini fridge. But back in the 60s, it was a feature that carried a kind of respect. You didn't play with it, you used it with intention. And even if you didn't smoke, you marveled at the glow, a tiny sun, waiting behind the dash, just for you. Another bit of quiet genius from the 1960s that most people under 50 have never seen in action was the floor vent. Not the kind that blew warm air from a heater, but the cool air vent you could open with your foot. It was a small flap, usually down by the driver's or passenger's feet, and when you pulled the lever or pressed the latch, it opened a passage straight to the outside. Just like that, fresh air poured in from the road. No fans, no electronics, just the wind itself doing the work. It was particularly glorious on warm days, when the sun had been baking the car all afternoon. You'd pop that vent open and suddenly there'd be a little breeze at your ankles, earthy, grassy, whatever the world smelled like that day. And unlike the windows, it didn't mess up your hair or make papers fly around the cabin. It was discreet. It was local. My dad always said it felt like driving with your feet in a river. We'd use those vents during springtime when the air was thick with lilacs and freshly cut grass. Sometimes, even during thunderstorms, we'd crack it just enough to let the smell of rain creep in. It connected you to the road, to the season, to something alive. These days, with sealed cabins and filtered air conditioning, cars feel more like moving offices. Comfortable, sure, but cut off from the real world. Those old floor vents reminded you that you were still part of it, still breathing the same air as the trees, the fields, the roadkill, and the sky. If you ever slid across the back seat of a 1960s car, you'll remember the bench seat wide, flat, and without a single divider in sight. It was less like a seat and more like a sofa on wheels. In the front, it allowed the driver and passenger, and sometimes even a third person in the middle, to ride shoulder to shoulder. There were no center consoles, no cup holders, no armrests separating you, just one continuous cushion that stretched from door to door. And that changed everything about how a car felt. On date nights, couples could sit close, even hold hands while the driver steered with one arm. On long trips, kids would stretch out and nap across the whole row, legs in each other's laps, heads leaning on windows. I remember my brother Charlie daring me to sit in the middle spot, the hot seat. He called it because it meant being the one who had to slide forward and yell out if a cop was nearby. Even the seat belts, when they existed, were simple lap straps you had to fish out from under you, and not every family used them. My mom used to drape a folded towel across the middle for us to sit on, just to keep the vinyl from burning our legs in the summer heat. The bench seat wasn't just a design choice. It was a symbol of openness, of closeness, of a time before compartmentalization. Sure, bucket seats are more ergonomic, but they'll never recreate that sense of shared space. That stretch of seat where memories were made, arguments were whispered, and songs were sung 3 kids wide, windows down, radio up. Before seatbelts became mandatory, and before airbags took over, many 1960s dashboards were padded, not just for looks, but for safety. It might seem laughable now, but that thin layer of foam wrapped in vinyl was considered a big leap forward in car design. Automakers began promoting crash padding as a thoughtful touch, part of what they called passive safety. The idea was simple. If your head or chest hit the dashboard, it was better to meet something soft. Not soft like a pillow, of course, but compared to the hard metal dashes of the 40s and 50s, this was progress. I remember running my hand along the dash of our old Chevrolet and pressing down on the cushion just to see how much give it had. It was warm from the sun, smooth under your fingertips, and often had a stitched seam that made it look almost like upholstery. And because it didn't have built-in screens or gadgets, the dashboard had room to be elegant, long, uninterrupted panels in turquoise or tan, gently curving around the driver like a hug. Sometimes it cracked with age, sure, but even that had charm. Those cracks told stories. They were roadmaps of sun and time. And there was a comfort in knowing that, in a world of chrome and steel, someone had thought to add just a little softness where it might matter most. We didn't think of it as cutting-edge safety. Not really. We just knew that it felt nice to touch. And in a car, sometimes that was enough, a little cushion between you and the world. The ignition key in a 1960s car did more than just start the engine. It unlocked a whole little world. These weren't the chunky fobs we carry around today with buttons and transponders and keyless starts. No, they were slim, simple metal keys, often with a tiny logo stamped into the head. You could slide one into your pocket without even noticing it was there. Most cars back then had 2, one for the doors and trunk, and a separate one for the ignition. Some even used the same key for everything, and turning the ignition was an experience in itself. You didn't just press a button and wait for silence. You inserted the key, gave it a firm twist, and the engine came to life with a shudder and a growl. It wasn't instant. The starter motor had a voice of its own, like a cranky old man clearing his throat. My dad used to say, "Listen to her, she's waking up," and he'd pat the dashboard like he was encouraging a horse. And if it was cold out, you had to finesse it, pump the gas just right, let the choke do its work, and try not to flood the engine. You learned patience. You learned the rhythm of your particular car. Today's engines are silent and obedient, efficient, yes, but a little soul got lost in the transition. Those old keys weren't just tools, they were rituals. Turning them meant you were going somewhere. It was a small act of trust in the machine, in yourself, in the road ahead. Let's talk about one of the most overlooked wonders of 1960s cars, the high beam switch on the floor. That's right, you didn't flick a lever on the steering column like we do now. Back then, you used your foot. Tucked off to the left of the brake, there was a little round button you could tap with your toe to switch between low and high beams. And let me tell you, once you got used to it, it was second nature. No fumbling with your fingers in the dark. No taking your hand off the wheel. Just a clean little click under your shoe, and the road ahead lit up like a stage. As kids, we thought it was magic. Sometimes we'd sneak our feet over and try to tap it ourselves, earning a scolding and a laugh from the front seat. On country roads, that button was your best friend. You'd ride along with low beams until the night thickened or a curve loomed, then click the trees and fields sprang into view. If you saw another car, you gave a quick flick to dim back down, a quiet courtesy that all drivers respected. There was a rhythm to it, a give and take. In winter, I remember my dad tapping the switch with his boot, then stomping snow off on the mat. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't electronic, but it worked reliably and simply. Most drivers today wouldn't know what that little button was if they saw it, but for us, it was just part of driving. Another small dance step in the choreography of the road. If you were a child in the 1960s and lucky enough to sit in the front seat or bold enough to sneak up there when Mama wasn't looking, you probably remember the magic of the glove compartment. It wasn't just a place for manuals and napkins. It was a treasure chest. Every family's glove box was different, but they all held tiny mysteries. Ours had a small flashlight that barely worked, a plastic coin holder for tolls, a box of matches from some diner, and a roll of lifesavers that had melted together during one too many hot afternoons. There was usually a spare pair of sunglasses for Dad, a few maps folded like origami puzzles, and maybe a pen that had leaked long ago. But the part that fascinated me most was the tiny built-in light that flicked on when you opened it. It was like opening a miniature theater, warm and glowing, even if the bulb was always a little dim. I'd open it just to watch that light come on. It made the glove compartment feel important, like it was watching over the journey. Sometimes, Mama would tuck notes in there, grocery lists, or receipts she didn't want flying around the car. And when we took road trips, that's where the travel games and emergency granola bars lived. It was all so ordinary, and yet it felt so special. These days, glove compartments are colder, more clinical, but back then, it was a place where you might just find a map to adventure, or at the very least, a half-melted mint and a story waiting to be told. There was something quietly theatrical about the way doors closed on a 1960s car. Not the soft thud you hear today, dampened by layers of insulation and rubber. No, these cars closed with a weighty clunk, a mechanical punctuation that told you the ride was beginning. The handles themselves were often chrome, curved like the arm of a jukebox, and cool to the touch, no matter the weather. Inside, the door panels were simple but full of texture, pleated vinyl, maybe a bit of faux wood trim, and the kind of armrest that felt like it belonged in a diner booth. But my favorite part? The manual window crank. Just a little lever, waiting for a twist. We didn't think twice about it. If you wanted air, you turned the crank. If the rain came, you turned it back up. And kids? We were always eager to do it ourselves. There was a satisfaction in rolling the window down just right, hearing the air rush in, adjusting it a notch when the wind got too strong. No buttons, no motors, just a smooth, quiet spiral under your palm. I remember long drives with my elbow perched out that open window, the breeze tugging at my sleeve, sun on my face. You felt more connected, not just to the car, but to the world rushing past. These days, cars shield you from everything. But back then, a roll-down window and a door that shut with authority made you feel like you were setting off on something, even if it was just the grocery store. In the cars of the 1960s, the rearview mirror was more than just a reflective rectangle. It was a silent witness to life, unfolding, kids making faces in the back seat, Mama fixing her hair with a quick glance, Dad narrowing his eyes as he checked for tailgaters. But what really made it feel like a marvel back then was the day-night toggle feature. A little tab at the bottom of the mirror could be flipped to reduce glare from headlights behind you. We didn't have fancy tech, like automatic dimming or cameras. We had a finger, a tab, and a bit of clever glass. At night, when someone came up too close with their brights on, that soft greenish tint would cut the glare just enough to save your eyes. I can still see my dad's hand reach up and flick the switch without missing a beat, like second nature. Sometimes he'd mutter something under his breath about the guy behind us having the sun strapped to his bumper, and Mama would chuckle. During the day, that mirror caught all kinds of little moments, like Carol Ann and I whispering secrets in the back seat, or Charlie picking his nose when he thought no one was watching. That mirror saw it all. And when the sun set and the road ahead dimmed, it reminded you of what was behind, not just traffic, but memories. A glance, a flick, a reflection. It was simple, but it worked. And in a world of chrome and vinyl, that little mirror helped you keep your eyes on the present, while gently holding the past right behind you. There was a quiet kind of thrill the first time you opened a trunk with a button, not on a key fob or a dashboard, but a discreet little button hidden under the lip of the trunk itself or inside the glove compartment. Some cars still used a key back there, but the more modern ones, they had a spring-loaded mechanism that made the lid pop up with the softest push. It felt like magic, mechanical magic. I remember watching my dad load up groceries on a Saturday afternoon, balancing paper bags on one arm while pressing the button with the other. Thunk! Up it went, smooth as could be, the trunk yawning open like it had been waiting for its cue. Some trunks had carpeting inside, but most didn't. Just bare metal and that rubber mat with the little ridges that held in spilled soda or a runaway bolt. There might be a spare tire tucked underneath, a jack, maybe an old flannel blanket, or a jug of antifreeze rolling around. Mama always said the trunk was like the family's junk drawer on wheels. And in many ways, she was right. I can still hear the echo inside as suitcases were loaded for summer trips. The thump of a cooler, the scrape of lawn chairs, the careful placement of her casserole dish when we drove to a church potluck. That space held more than cargo. It held intention, departure, return, and the simple satisfaction of something that opened when you asked it to. No humming motors, no remote sensors, just a button, a latch, and the wide-open promise of the road ahead. Let that one sink in. When you're ready for the next mystery, hit subscribe. The 1960s car horn wasn't just for emergencies. It was communication. It was character. And in some towns, it was practically a language all its own. Those horns had a voice strong, confident, sometimes a little sassy, not the polite chirp of today's sedans, but a bold honk that said, "I'm here," or "Heads up," or "I'll be right out," just grabbing my coat. I remember the way my dad would tap the horn when we pulled into the Crandall's driveway, not long enough to be rude, but just a quick, friendly beep that let them know we'd arrived. And Mrs. Crandall, bless her heart, would appear at the door still wearing her apron and curlers, waving as if the queen herself had come calling. Horns back then were usually centered right on the steering wheel, or arranged in a chrome ring you could press anywhere. And they worked instantly. There was no lag, no delay. just pressure and sound. Charlie once leaned on it accidentally during a 4th of July parade and nearly scared the church choir half out of their socks. We still laugh about that. But what I loved most was that little double tap beep beep that people used when they passed someone they knew on the road. It wasn't just noise. It was neighborly, familiar, a way to say, "I see you," or "drive safe." These days, horns feel sterile, only used in frustration. But back then, that sound was part of the soundtrack of the town, loud enough to cut through a summer evening, but warm enough to feel like a wave from across the street. Sometimes, the most magical part of a car ride wasn't the destination. It was the pause along the way, when someone reached for the ashtray. Now, before you worry, this isn't about glamorizing smoking. It's just the way things were. Nearly every car in the 1960s came with a built-in ashtray, and not just one. You had one in the dashboard, and often tiny flip-out trays in the backseat armrests, too. Some even came with little chrome cigarette lighters that popped out with a satisfying click and glowed orange when they were hot. I can still see my Uncle Pete tapping his cigarette on the edge of that tray, telling stories with his arm draped over the wheel and smoke curling like ribbon into the sunlight. Of course, Mama didn't like it, and if we were in the car, she'd crack the window and shoot him a look. But those ashtrays weren't always used for smoking. Ours held pennies, paper clips, stray buttons, and once for reasons no one could explain, a marble. When I was little, I thought it was just a tiny treasure drawer, a secret compartment built into the car just for us. There was something tidy about it, something that said, "We made room for your habits, your quirks, your mess." These days, most cars don't even have one. They've been replaced with charging ports and cup holders. But back then, that little square drawer with the metal edge was just another part of the car's personality. Always there, waiting to be opened with a gentle push and a quiet clink. Before digital displays and soft chimes took over, a 1960s car told you everything you needed to know with needles, dials, and warning lights that blinked like little bits of Morse code. The dashboard wasn't just functional, it was a stage of gauges. Speedometer front and center, odometer ticking upward like a secret tally of your adventures, and to the side, fuel, oil pressure, temperature, and sometimes a battery gauge. No touchscreens, no voice assistants, just clear circular meters with tiny hash marks and orange or white needles that quivered as the engine warmed up. My dad taught me to read those gauges like a weatherman reads clouds. "Watch that temp needle," he'd say. "If it drifts past center, pull over." There was no backup plan. No car was going to buzz your pocket or send a push notification. You had to pay attention. One of my favorites was the high beam indicator, a tiny blue light shaped like a headlamp that lit up when you clicked your brights on with your foot. That's right, the switch was a little button on the floor, to the left of the brake. You'd tap it with your toe, and click, the road ahead lit up, and that tiny blue eye reminded you not to forget. It felt mechanical, like you were part of the machine, not just riding in it. And when something was wrong, it wasn't a voice saying, "low tire pressure." It was a little red light labeled Gen or Temp, glowing like a warning from deep inside the car's soul. We didn't need more. We listened, watched, and felt our way through. It's funny now to think of how something as simple as a key could hold so much authority. In the 1960s, car keys weren't electronic, they weren't embedded with chips, and they certainly didn't open your doors from across a parking lot, but they were solid, real. A car key then was a slender piece of cut metal, often stamped with the automaker's logo, and it was used for everything: ignition, doors, trunk, glove compartment. One key ruled them all, and it lived on a ring alongside the house key, the mailbox key, and maybe a bottle opener. My dad used to hang his keys on a little hook by the back door, the same hook, every day. You could hear them jingle when he reached for them. That familiar sound marking the start of errands, school drop-offs, Sunday drives. and slipping that key into the ignition felt like lighting a promise. A quarter turn, a click, and then the rumble of life beneath your feet. If the engine didn't catch, you pumped the gas pedal twice and tried again. There was a rhythm to it. Starting the car wasn't just a button press. It was a process, and it made you pay attention. We didn't leave keys in the ignition unless we were at home. And we never lost them, because losing the car key meant more than just inconvenience. It meant the day's whole plan came to a halt. I still have one of those old GM keys tucked away in a drawer. It's worn smooth from use, the teeth a little dull, but when I hold it, I remember how powerful such a small thing could feel. Cup holders weren't always a given. In fact, back in the 1960s, cars didn't come with them at all. If you wanted to bring along your coffee or a bottle of pop, you got creative. Mama used to wedge her thermos between her purse and the door, and more than once I saw soda bottles rolling back and forth on the floorboards like little glass torpedoes. That was just the way of things. You learned to balance. Some folks bought those metal or plastic clip-on holders that hooked onto the windowsill, usually shaky and never quite level. I remember one summer ride when Harold tried to balance a milkshake on the dash. One sharp left turn and it was everywhere, dripping down the radio, into the glove box, even onto Mama's knitting bag. He got the silent treatment all the way to his cousin's barbecue. Still, those early attempts to tame our traveling drinks were part of the charm. There was something kind of thrilling about holding a waxy paper cup with a plastic lid and hoping it wouldn't spill as the car hit a bump. And those lids, remember the little paper straw poking out, or that crinkly cellophane top you had to press down with your thumb? We didn't expect a perfect setup. We just made do. When cars finally started adding built-in cup holders in later years, it felt almost luxurious. But by then, something had changed. Driving wasn't quite the same impromptu adventure it had been. I sometimes miss the days when a simple root beer on a bumpy road required steady hands, good timing, and a touch of luck. In the 1960s, the glove compartment wasn't just for gloves, though that's where the name came from. It was the car's little closet, the keeper of odds and ends, and it always had a certain mystery to it. Most of the time, ours held a flashlight that barely worked, a few crumpled road maps, a pack of tissues, and at least one sticky roll of lifesavers that had melted into the lining during a summer trip to Lake Geneva. Daddy kept the car's registration in there, folded neatly in an envelope with "Important" scribbled across it in red ink. And Mama? She'd stash a few emergency bobby pins, a compact mirror, and once to everyone's surprise, a pair of earrings she thought she'd lost for good. The latch was usually stiff, with a chrome button you had to press just right. When it popped open, the door would fall with a soft thud and a slight squeak. I loved being the one to open it when Daddy said, "Check for a pen," as if I were unlocking some secret compartment. And it wasn't just our car. Carol Ann's family kept candy in theirs, those little butterscotch discs in the yellow wrappers. Mr. Luby, our old crossing guard, said he once stored a flask in his for emergencies, though I don't think he ever clarified what kind. Today's glove boxes are slimmer, more sterile. They rarely have that cluttered, lived-in feeling. But back then, they were like little time capsules, a quiet record of the places you'd been, the things you might need, and the small surprises you didn't know you'd saved. One of the most fascinating things about 1960s cars was how much they relied on feel. Power steering wasn't a standard feature back then, especially in the earlier part of the decade. You really had to wrestle the wheel, especially at low speeds, or when pulling into a tight parking spot. Daddy used to joke that driving Mama's old Buick was better than lifting weights, and he wasn't far off. The steering wheel itself was huge, thin, and often cool to the touch, made of hard plastic or Bakelite. There were no padded grips or ergonomic shapes, just a wide ring with finger grooves that encouraged a full-handed grip. I can still feel the way it turned stiff at first, then looser once the car got rolling. On summer days, the wheel could get so hot it felt like touching a stove. You'd have to drape a rag over it if the car had been sitting in the sun too long. But the thing was, you were connected to the road in a way that modern power steering can't quite replicate. Every bump, every rut, every uneven patch of gravel came up through the wheel and into your fingertips. Driving felt like a conversation you turned, the car responded, and you adjusted by instinct. Later on, when power steering became more common, folks welcomed the change. It made long drives easier and parking less of a chore. But part of me still misses the old Armstrong method. There was something satisfying about muscling your way through a sharp turn, both hands gripping the wheel as you coaxed the car through with skill and a little grit. Back in the 1960s, car radios were more than just background noise. They were a companion, something alive in the dashboard, humming along as the world rolled by. Most cars came with AM radios by default. If you were lucky enough to have an FM tuner, or even an 8-track player later in the decade, well, that was the height of luxury. But even a simple AM radio could feel like magic. Ours had 2 big knobs, one for tuning, one for volume, and 5 black buttons you could press to jump between preset stations. I used to love watching Daddy flick through them with a satisfying click, the red tuning needle dancing behind the glass dial. On long drives, we'd listen to baseball games, country music, or the occasional preacher from downstate. And at night, there was something about late-night radio that felt secret and intimate. The signal would crackle, fade in and out with static, and then return with a voice that felt like it was speaking just to you. Mama would hum along to Patsy Cline, while I'd lean against the window, watching headlights blur past in the dark. The radio was the soundtrack to so many small moments, waiting in line at the drive-in, driving home from church, or just sitting in the car while Daddy ran into the hardware store. It didn't have Bluetooth or apps or smart playlists. It didn't need them. It was a simple box with a dial and a speaker, and somehow, that was all it took to bring the world into your car. One song, one voice, one story at a time. One thing that truly felt like a touch of magic in the 1960s was the way headlights flipped on. Most cars didn't have automatic anything, so when the sun began to set, it was up to the driver to reach for the little knob near the dashboard, usually pulled out like a drawer, to switch on the lights. There was something almost ceremonial about it. I remember sitting in the passenger seat as Daddy drove us home from Grandma Elsie's. The sky would turn that deep shade of indigo, and one by one, red tail lights would bloom ahead of us like fireflies. Then he'd say, "All right, time for lights," and reach over to pull the switch. A soft click, a brief hum, and suddenly, the dark road was carved into shape by twin beams of yellowish light. They weren't bright like today's LED things. No, these were warm, a little fuzzy at the edges, and they flickered slightly over every bump and dip. High beams were another trick altogether. You didn't push a button on the steering wheel. You stepped on a little metal switch on the floor with your left foot. I used to think it looked like a tiny robot head down there near the clutch. You'd stomp it once to turn the brights on, again to turn them off. It felt like a secret, only drivers knew it was there. These little routines added a kind of rhythm to driving that's mostly gone now. There was a satisfaction in manually doing things. You didn't rely on the car to think for you. You were the one calling the shots, one click and tap at a time. Some of the most fascinating features in 1960s cars weren't just mechanical, they were built around light. One I remember clear as day was the dome light. Every car had one, and it always felt oddly powerful. It sat like a little moon in the middle of the ceiling, ready to glow when a door opened or when you gave it a careful press. Ours had a yellow plastic cover that had turned brittle by the time I was a teenager. The light itself was dim by today's standards, almost orange, and it buzzed softly when it flicked on. Still, it was enough to help Mama find her purse in the dark, or for Daddy to read a map if we pulled off on the side of the road. What made it feel special, I think, was how rare we used it. You didn't leave it on long, not unless you wanted a drained battery. So when it came on, it meant something. Maybe we'd stopped for ice cream and were counting change. Or maybe someone had dropped a mitten or a pacifier and we were hunting through the back seat. I also remember the ritual of checking to make sure it turned off when the door closed. That little thud of the door, followed by a slow fade of the light, it was like the car settling in, saying, "We're done here." Modern cars have lights everywhere now, hidden in footwells and cup holders. But none of them quite capture that quiet, solitary glow of a 1960s dome light. It was simple, a little imperfect, and for a moment, it lit up a whole world of small, familiar things. A pause is good, but the secrets don't stop here. Subscribe and stay close. Turn signals were another feature that felt quietly magical in those old 1960s cars. Not because they were flashy, quite the opposite, but because of the way they added rhythm and sound to the drive. When you clicked the signal lever, usually mounted on the left side of the steering column, it made a very particular sound. Not a soft blink like today, but a loud, steady tick, 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 like an old kitchen timer. And that noise filled the car. It was constant, unapologetic, and somehow comforting. I used to sit in the back seat during errands, listening to it as we waited at stoplights or turned into the driveway. That tick became part of the car's personality. Every model had its own tone, its own pace. Some were sharp and fast, others slow and hollow, and if the bulb burned out, the sound would change faster, more urgent, as if the car itself knew something was wrong. Of course, not everyone used them the way they should. Daddy always signaled with time to spare. Mama would do it halfway into the turn. Charlie forgot half the time and claimed the lever stuck. But the rest of us relied on those little blinking arrows to understand one another on the road. At night, seeing that soft amber light flashing in front of you meant someone was thinking ahead. They weren't just driving, they were communicating. Today, it's all silent sensors and flashing mirrors. But back then, that steady click was like a voice in the car, marking time, calling out your next move, and filling the quiet with just enough sound to keep you company. Back in the 1960s, one feature that truly captured the spirit of a Sunday drive was the cigarette lighter. Now, I know smoking's out of fashion these days, and for good reason. But back then, that little coil tucked into the dash felt like something out of a spy movie. You'd push it in, and it would disappear with a quiet click. After a few seconds, it would pop out again, glowing red like the end of a branding iron. Daddy didn't smoke often, but when he did, usually just after fixing something around the house, he made a whole ritual of it. I remember sitting in the front seat, windows cracked just a sliver, watching him light up with one hand while steering with the other. It was the only time the car smelled like anything other than pine air freshener or motor oil. The lighter wasn't just for cigarettes either. People used it to burn off frayed string, light fireworks, or even heat up a bent key in winter. Eventually, as fewer folks smoked, the lighter socket got repurposed. Folks plugged in cassette adapters or early chargers when those came around. But for a while, that button was a standard part of the dash, like a small promise that even a car had its little bits of fire and ritual. I wouldn't call it glamorous now, but as a child, watching that tiny red coil glow against the dusk outside, it felt important. It was a moment, a breath, a pause before the next mile. There was something almost theatrical about the way car windows worked back then. No buttons, no hum of hidden motors, just a good old-fashioned crank. It was a small metal handle, usually with a plastic knob at the end, and it sat right there on the door like a tool waiting to be used. I can still remember how it felt in my hand, that satisfying resistance as you turned it clockwise to roll the glass down. It made a soft creaking sound, not unpleasant, like something mechanical and alive shifting into motion. And it didn't stop on its own. You had to know when to quit turning, or you'd end up with the window lopsided in the frame. Every kid who sat in the back seat got scolded at least once for playing with it too much. "You'll strip the gears," Daddy would say, which always sounded a little ominous, even if I didn't fully know what it meant. But those cranks gave you a kind of control that felt personal. You decided how far the window came down just enough to catch a breeze, or all the way to lean out and wave at the neighbor's dog. Sometimes you'd roll it down halfway and rest your elbow there, the metal edge warm from the sun, and when the storm clouds rolled in, you had to be quick, reach across the seat, and crank it shut before the rain hit. We take power windows for granted now, tapping buttons like we're flipping through TV channels. But there was a quiet dignity in those cranks. They connected you directly to the machine. Simple, sturdy, and exactly as useful as the strength in your arm. Before cup holders became a standard part of every car interior, folks in the 1960s had to get a little creative. You didn't have a molded slot waiting to cradle your soda. You had laps, glove compartments, and that space between the seat and the door where everything eventually disappeared. I remember car trips where Mama would hand Daddy a steaming cup of coffee in a thick ceramic mug, not a travel tumbler. Mind you, just a regular mug from the kitchen. He'd balance it between his knees while driving with one hand on the wheel. If we hit a bump, we'd all brace instinctively, hoping not to wear the coffee. On long drives, we sometimes picked up root beer floats from the local drive-in, the kind that came in waxy paper cups with those little red and white striped straws. With no place to put them, you either held on tight or wedged the cup into your purse if it was big enough. I think someone eventually sold those metal clip-on cup holders that attached to the window, but they always looked like a science experiment waiting to fail. Still, no one really complained. We just figured out ways to make it work. The dashboard might hold your gum, the ashtray might collect loose change, and your drink? Well, that depended on how steady your hand was. Looking back, it was all part of the ride, learning to balance, to share, to adapt. And somehow, those spills and sticky fingers were part of the memory too. The modern convenience is nice, sure, but there was something personal about having to hold your drink, like the car was reminding you to stay present and hang on. One thing I don't think younger folks realize is just how rare air conditioning used to be in cars. In the 1960s, if your vehicle had factory A, C, well, that was something to talk about. Most of us made do with the 4 windows and something we called 460 air. 4 windows down, going 60 miles per hour. On especially hot days, you'd crank down the front windows and maybe vent the back ones open just a hair, trying to catch a cross breeze. I can still remember the feeling of that hot wind blasting in, whipping your hair around until you gave up and tied it back. There were little triangle-shaped vent windows, too. They swung open on a pivot and were perfect for directing a steady stream of air right onto your face or hands. Those were magic in summer. The glass got warm in the sun, and sometimes the knobs would be hot to the touch. But they worked. We didn't complain. If you were lucky enough to know someone whose dad had a Cadillac with air conditioning, stepping into that car felt like entering another world. It wasn't cold, exactly, but cool enough to make your skin sigh. I remember visiting Aunt Gladys once and riding in her friend's car. The cool air made the leather seats feel softer, the ride smoother. It felt like being rich for 15 minutes. Most of us just coped. We brought wet washcloths in plastic bags, froze bottles of pop to keep on our laps, and rolled down the windows as soon as the engine turned over. But even now, on summer drives, part of me misses that wild, roaring wind. It wasn't comfortable, but it was honest. Another feature that always felt a little magical to me was the way some cars had push-button radios. Not digital, of course these were analog, with a horizontal dial that slid behind a glass window as you tuned it. The real charm was in those preset buttons. You could pull the tuning knob to your favorite station, then push one of the buttons in until it clicked to save it. After that, One tap would snap the tuner right back to that station with a satisfying mechanical thunk. Daddy had one set to the AM news station, another for polka on Sunday mornings, and one that picked up the gospel choir from the church downstate. The buttons weren't silent. They had heft. You could feel the spring and metal underneath, and the tuner would zip across the dial like it knew where it was going. On road trips, we'd all take turns pushing buttons just to see what we could find, sometimes catching a baseball game halfway through, or an old country tune that made Mama hum. Static was part of the fun, too. You had to work with the radio, not against it. Twist the knob just right, adjust the antenna, wait for the clouds to shift. And when the music finally came in clear, it felt like a little reward. The car was never silent. Not really. Between the wind, the hum of tires, and the soft crackle of the radio, there was always sound. It felt alive. These days, with everything on demand, you don't get those little surprises. But back then, pressing a button and hearing your favorite song roll in static, and all was enough to make the road feel like home. One of the earliest car memories I have is watching my dad turn the key in the ignition and hearing the engine roar to life. But in some fancier cars during the 1960s, you didn't even need a key in the traditional sense, not if you had one of those futuristic starter buttons. They weren't common, but when you did see one, it felt like something out of the Jetsons. Just a button, sometimes chrome, sometimes black, right there on the dash. You'd press it in while holding the ignition switch or after flipping a toggle, and suddenly the engine would rumble awake. Even in cars that didn't have a push start, there was something powerful about the ignition process back then. It required both a hand and an ear. You didn't just crank it and go. You listened. You learned the timing when to ease off the key, when to give it a little gas, when something didn't sound quite right. In the winter, starting the car was a small victory. You'd turn the key and pray it caught on the first try. The engine would groan, the battery would wheeze, and sometimes, if you were lucky, it would cough and fire up like an old bear waking from a nap. Even then, you had to let it warm up. We'd sit in the driveway, windows fogged up, Mama rubbing the windshield with her sleeve, while Daddy tapped the gas to keep it alive. That button, or key, whichever you had, was more than a tool. It was the beginning of the journey. And somehow, pressing it down or turning it just right made the car feel like it was listening to you. You can tell a lot about a car by the way it smells. Back in the 1960s, that was especially true. Before the age of synthetic air fresheners in every scent imaginable, cars had a smell all their own, a warm, lived-in blend of vinyl, engine oil, sun-baked metal, and whatever had been tucked under the seats for too long. But there was one little invention that gave drivers some control over that atmosphere: the dashboard-mounted air freshener. The most iconic was the green pine tree that dangled from the rearview mirror. It looked innocent enough, but the second you opened that cellophane wrapper, mercy me, it hit you like a peppermint factory on fire. The scent was strong, sharp, and not entirely natural. Some folks loved it. Others would cut a tiny slit in the wrapper and let it breathe slow, like easing a new perfume into the room. There were other shapes too: lemons, cherries, even little plastic domes you could clip to your vents. And every once in a while, you'd get into someone's car and find a sachet tucked in the glove box or a canister under the seat that hissed when opened. Mama tried to make her own once, with dried lavender and cinnamon sticks in a muslin pouch. It didn't last long, but it made the car smell like her kitchen, and I still think of her when I catch that scent. These days, fragrance is big business. But back then, one pine tree swinging from the mirror could make your car feel fresh, clean, and just a little bit fancy, even if the floorboards were lined with straw wrappers and Sunday school bulletins. Fuel was a conversation in the 1960s. Not a screen you tapped and forgot. Most cars had a dedicated gauge with a needle sweeping from E to F. And if you were driving something spunkier, you might even have a separate ammeter and oil pressure gauge tucked alongside it. but the gas gauge was the one everyone watched. It wasn't always precise. On hills, it could drift, and some senders got quirky with age, sticking stubbornly at a quarter tank until the engine coughed and told the truth. We learned to read its moods the way you read a friend's face. Daddy swore you never let it dip under half in winter and under a quarter in summer, because a clogged filter or a cranky fuel pump never announces itself at a good time. Stations were full service more often than not. You'd roll over the black rubber hose and hear the ding that summoned an attendant. He'd pump the gas, clean your windshield with a real squeegee, check the oil level with a rag, and sometimes test the tire pressure. Prices were posted in big metal numerals, and yes, gas was cheaper, but paychecks were smaller too. Regular and premium meant leaded fuels, and the smell was sharp and heavy, the kind you carried home on your clothes. We kept a paper log in the glove box where Daddy noted miles and gallons with a ballpoint pen, doing the math right there to see how the car was drinking. No apps, no averages, just pencil figures and pride. When the needle finally nudged past full after a stop, there was a tiny lift in everyone's shoulders. A quiet assurance that the next miles were covered. A small touch that felt wonderfully refined in the 1960s was the dash tissue dispenser. Most were not built into the car from the factory. They were dealer accessories or 5-and-dime finds, and they clipped neatly to the lower edge of the dash, the glove box door, or the sun visor. The housings were usually metal with a bright chrome face, sometimes painted to match the interior, and inside sat a flat box of tissues, often a travel pack from Kleenex. A spring kept the stack pressed forward so one sheet waited at the slot, ready to be plucked with a fingertip. It sounds simple, and it was, but it felt elegant. Mama used those tissues for everything. A quick blot of lipstick before church, a dab at a child's scraped knee, a rescue for a dripping root beer on a summer drive. On foggy mornings, a folded square wiped the inside of the windshield long before defrosters caught up. The lid made a tidy little click when it shut, and the shiny faceplate caught the glow of the radio dial at night. Some families clipped the dispenser to the visor to keep it closer at hand, though the visor mount could sag if the pack was heavy. In catalogs, you could find versions with small mirrors or embossed logos, and dealers sometimes added them as a courtesy accessory after a service visit. No one worried about blocking an airbag, because there were none. The whole idea was convenience and a touch of polish, the kind of thing that made even a plain sedan feel cared for. When you see one today at a swap meet, pick it up. You can feel the sturdiness, the way it was meant to live in a car, ready for little messes and small mercies. Winter had its own soundtrack in the 1960s, and a lot of it came from the wheels. Most family cars were rear-wheel drive with bias-ply tires, so when the big snows arrived, you learned a few rituals. Snow chains were the first. Daddy would lay them out flat beside the tire, roll the car forward a foot, then hook the links together and snug them with rubber straps that looked like little spiders. The first mile on bare pavement sounded like a bucket of bolts, but once the tires found packed snow, the rattle settled into a steady clatter that meant traction. You kept your speed modest. 20 or 30 was plenty with chains, and you avoided sudden stops. Some neighbors switched to studded snow tires when they showed up in the decade. Little metal pins in the tread bit into ice better than plain rubber, though they were noisy on dry roads, and some states later restricted them because of pavement wear. In our town, people put sandbags or salt bags in the trunk to add weight over the drive axle. A short shovel lived back there too, along with a coffee can of kitty litter for grip if you were stuck. Heaters took a while to warm, defrosters were patient rather than quick, and washer fluid needed alcohol in it or the nozzles froze. If you were lucky, your car had a limited slip rear end with a fancy name like Positraction. Most did not, so you learned to start gently and steer with a light hand. Chains came off when the streets cleared because they could chew a tire if left on too long. The whole routine was work, but it turned a blizzard from a wall into a hill you could climb with a little care and a calm foot. Cars in the 1960s doubled as living rooms on wheels, and not just for the silly scenes you see in movies. With big bench seats and generous legroom, families treated the cabin like a moving parlor. On Friday nights after football games, we'd sit in the school parking lot with the radio low, passing a paper sack of popcorn while the heater ticked itself warm. On long Sunday drives, Mama doled out sandwiches from a wax paper stack, the smell of bologna and mustard mixing with sun-warmed vinyl. The car was where hard conversations happened too. Daddy gave quiet advice at red lights, the kind you remember years later because there wasn't anywhere to run from it. Friends shared secrets in the back seat on the way home from church youth group, faces half lit by the glow of the radio dial. When storms rolled in, the windshield became a theater screen for lightning and wipers, a slow metronome for thinking things through. If a baby fell asleep, you circled the block rather than wake them, learning every crack in the neighborhood pavement by feel. No one had screens. The entertainment was each other, the local station, and whatever rolled past the glass. It wasn't perfect. Arguments got loud, and heat or cold could test everyone's patience. But the car made a kind of refuge in motion. Doors closed with that certain clunk, and the outside world softened. You could talk or sit in companionable silence and let the miles smooth the sharp edges of a day. Years later, you remember the dashboard more than the destination, and the way the cabin held your words like a good room in a small house. Evening drives with no destination were a real habit in the 1960s, the kind of small luxury families afforded themselves when gas was cheap by the gallon and time moved a little slower after supper. You piled into the car while the dishes dried in the rack, the sky turning lavender at the edges, and Daddy would say, "Let us go see what the river looks like tonight." Windows down just enough for a soft breeze, radio low on a local station, the road ahead glowing under sodium lamps and the last light of day. Sometimes you traced the same loop each week past the ball fields, the grain elevator, the row of storefronts with closed signs flipped and neon clocks still ticking. Other nights, you would follow a road you did not usually take, just to watch the fields roll out in a dark quilt and the stars sharpen above the hood. It was not about going anywhere. It was about letting the day shake itself off, while the engine hummed and the tires sang. Kids in the back seat counted lightning bugs, or named the few constellations they knew. Couples in the front seat let the quiet do most of the talking. If you stopped, it might be for a cone at the dairy stand or to park by the water and listen to the cicadas. When you turned toward home, the cabin felt cooler, calmer, the air sweet with cut grass and a hint of river. You pulled into the driveway lighter than when you left, as if the car had carried away some of the day's worries into the dark. Station wagons in the 1960s were the family pickup in a nicer suit, and nothing proved it like moving day. With the back seat folded flat, that cargo floor ran long and level, ready for boxes of dishes, a crib, or the card table that came out for holidays. Many wagons wore wood grain trim that looked cheerful in a driveway, and roof racks were common, sturdy rails that took ladders, or a rolled rug with a few loops of clothesline. By the middle of the decade, Ford offered a clever tailgate on its big wagons that could drop down like a gate or swing out like a door, which made loading easier when space was tight. You learned small tricks. Lay quilts to keep furniture from scuffing the vinyl. Slide the heaviest box up against the seat back so it would not drift under braking. Keep a roll of twine in the glove box because someone always needed just a little more. If something long stuck out the back, you tied the lid and tucked a red shop rag on the end. A station wagon could swallow the fines from a church rummage sale and still have room for 2 kids and the family dog. On Saturday mornings, the tailgate became a bench while Daddy sorted what went to the attic and what went to the curb. On summer evenings, it hauled coolers and lawn chairs to the park for band concerts. It was not glamorous work, but it made life possible in a way sedans struggled to match. When you shut the tailgate and wiped your hands, the car felt like a good helper, the kind that made a hard day lighter and a long list shorter. People joke about new car smell now, but in the 1960s, it was a real thing with a personality all its own. Open a fresh sedan on the dealer lot, and the first breath was warm vinyl and adhesive, a kind of sweet chemical note that came from the plastic seat covers, dashboard padding, headliner glue, and the sealants tucked into seams you never saw. The floor mats might still be covered by crisp paper printed with, "Thank you for your business," and the chrome on the door handles felt cooler than the air inside, as if the car had been holding its breath for you. That scent wasn't all perfume, it was the off-gassing of new materials, mostly vinyl and rubber with plasticizers and solvents, plus a little whiff of the terry undercoating sprayed to keep rust at bay. Dealers sometimes left clear slipcovers on the seats, which sharpened the smell and made the upholstery squeak against your clothes. If the car wore white wall tires, there might be a faint hint of the protective blue film that washed off at home with a bucket and brush. We did not think about health warnings. We thought about possibility. Daddy would turn the key, the radio would glow, and the engine's first idle mixed with that factory aroma to make a memory that stuck harder than any wax. Mama saved the window sticker in the owner's packet, and for a few weeks there was a paper tag on the key fob that said everything you needed to know in tidy type. The scent faded, as all beginnings do, replaced by life's ordinary stories. But for a little while, it felt like hope had a fragrance, and it came standard with every full tank and clean odometer. Keeping a car clean in the 1960s felt almost like good manners. Saturday mornings meant buckets, a soft sponge, and a hose dragging a silver arc across the driveway. We did not talk about ceramic coatings or foam cannons. We talked about dish soap if you were thrifty, or a bottle of car wash if Daddy had stopped at the station. Chrome got its own attention. A rag with polish brought the bumpers and handles back to a bright shine that made the whole car look proud. Wax was a quiet ritual. Paste came in squat tins from names you recognized, and the smell was sweet and a little sharp. You worked panel by panel, lay it on thin, then waited for the haze before buffing with a clean towel or an old diaper that had been washed to softness. White walls were a badge of honor. You scrubbed the ring with a stiff brush and cleaner until it turned from street gray back to paper white. If the tires were new, you rinsed away the faint blue film that protected the rubber in shipping. Bug spots on the nose got a soak in a patient hand. Tar at the rocker panels surrendered to kerosene on a rag, then another wash to make it right. When everything was dry, a chamois skated over the paint and left it smooth as a table. If you had time, you vacuumed the floor mats at the full-service station and checked the paper air freshener in the glove box. By afternoon, the car did not just look better, it felt better. When the sun slid down and the paint picked up a warm glow, Daddy would step back, nod once, and say, "That will do." Cars turned into time capsules without trying. Things slid under bench seats and disappeared into the seams where the vacuum could not reach. When you finally pulled a seat forward, you might find a pencil with the school name still readable, a couple of pennies gone dull, a marble that no one remembered losing, and a paperclip bent into a fish. The map pocket hid brochures from places you meant to visit and never did. The glove box kept ticket stubs, restaurant matchbooks, and a folded list of phone numbers written in careful script. Under the spare tire cover, there was always something that rattled. A lug nut, a washer, a golf tee from a public course. The radio knob that cracked one winter would lie in a corner until someone needed it again. If the car was older, the owner's packet held a dog-eared warranty card and a dealer service stamp or two. On warm afternoons, the sun baked a trace of perfume into the headliner, and the faint scent of crayons told you that children had ridden there. None of these things mattered much by themselves, but together they felt like proof that the car had been busy living with you. When it was time to sell, you shook the floor mats and checked the ashtray one last time. Something always turned up, a lost earring, a coupon that expired years ago, a note to yourself that no longer needed an answer. The car had saved it anyway. There is a hush that arrives when a trip ends and the engine stops. The fan winds down, belts relax, and the exhaust ticks softly as metal cools. If the radio was still on, you hear it settle from a murmur to nothing as the key turns back. Headlights blink out and night folds in close around the glass. For a few breaths, you stay in the driver's seat and listen to the quiet make its way through the cabin. It is not truly silent. There is the faint pinging from the manifold, a tiny creak from the steering as the car settles on the springs, and the pop of the fuel cap when the heat shift lifts it a hair. In winter, you can smell cold air slipping through the vents and the last trace of warm dust from the heater box. In summer, the vinyl releases the day's heat like bricks at sundown. If someone else is with you, voices drop without trying. If you are alone, the stillness makes space for whatever thought followed you home. A porch light snaps on. A neighbor's dog gives a single bark. You gather your things and close the door, and the heavy latch gives that certain final clunk. Inside the house, life picks up again, but that small interlude between motion and arrival lingers. It is the car's way of telling you the road can rest now. Goodbyes to cars are quieter than goodbyes to people, but they carry their own weight. Before the sale, you clean more carefully than usual. Coins from the ashtray into a jar, maps into the kitchen drawer, ice scraper back to the porch. The title is signed with a steady hand, and the extra key that lived in a coffee can on the workbench finally comes out to meet its mate. Sometimes you take one more loop around the block. You listen for familiar rattles that never got fixed, and for the way second gear feels on the long curve by the school. The heater smells the same, a little of dust and a little of antifreeze, and the seat cushion has that one soft spot you learn to favor. At the curb, the buyer checks the lights and the wipers and nods when the engine settles into a warm idle. You say it always liked regular gas, and it starts better if you do not touch the pedal. None of that matters much now, but it feels right to say. When the car pulls away, the shape that used to belong in your driveway looks suddenly smaller. The sound fades at the corner, and you stand with the signed slip in your pocket and the echo of 100 errands in your chest. In a week, you will forget the license number, but for a while, you will hear that door close in your mind and see that dash glow at dusk. In the end, those features from the 1960s were more than gadgets. Wing windows were not just glass. They were a way to invite summer inside. Bench seats were not just cushions. They were places where brothers elbowed and dates slid close. Push-button radios were not just switches. They were openings to voices that kept you company on lonely stretches. Even the little things, the tissue box clip and the day-night mirror, carried a kind of care that said someone thought about the human sitting here. It was not all charm. Fuel had lead in it. Safety lags cost lives. And the road was not kind to everyone. But inside those cars, many families learned patience in traffic, learned to share a blanket and a sandwich on the way to a game, and learned to keep going when the weather turned. The mechanical world asks something of you, and in giving it your attention, you got a certain closeness back. When you remember the era now, you do not think of spec sheets. You think of the sound of a starter on a cold morning, the click of a turn lever, the way a hood ornament caught the sun. You think of the miles that connected one small life to another. That was one layer. Take a moment, then subscribe, and we'll go deeper next time.